Okay, today we're diving into the Karen Reed trial. It's a case that, well, it started with a really tragic death, but it's become incredibly complex, hasn't it? So many questions.
Absolutely. Just layers upon layers, and finding clear answers seems, well, difficult.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're really focusing on one specific crucial moment, or series of moments, really. It's the cross-examination of firefighter Whitley.
Yes, a key witness.
Right. We've got some excerpts detailing this part of the trial, and our mission basically is to unpack why the discrepancies in his testimony are potentially so significant for this case.
It's a fascinating look at how courtroom strategy works. The sources we have really paint a picture of the tension in that room when Whitley was on the stand.
You can almost feel it, can't you? Here's this witness, firefighter Whitley, initially presented as, seasoned, reliable, a professional first responder, someone you'd expect to be observant.
Precisely. His testimony should carry weight. But then the defense lawyer, Ms. Giannetti, steps up.
And her approach seems really meticulous. She's ready to dissect his previous statements, right? Comparing what he said back in 2022 to his testimony now in 2024.
Yeah, that's the core strategy here, looking for inconsistencies. And they find some key ones.
Okay, let's talk about the first big one they apparently hit on. This whole issue of how long John O'Keefe was supposedly out there in the cold.
Right, so in Whitley's 2022 testimony, according to these accounts, there wasn't much detail about the duration. It was less specific.
Okay, but then fast forward to 2024.
And suddenly there's this very crucial detail. Whitley testifies that Karen Reed asked something like, could her husband survive being outside without a jacket for many hours?
Many hours.
Yeah.
That's a really specific and potentially damning phrase to add later, isn't it?
It is. It changes the potential timeline quite dramatically. And naturally, the defense jumps right on that.
I bet. They ask, how could such a significant detail, that specific phrase, just be forgotten the first time around?
Exactly. How does that happen? It immediately raises questions about the memory itself.
Yeah.
Was it always there? Was it perhaps influenced by something later?
It plants doubt. So what does that actually mean for a jury when a detail like that emerges so much later? Does it automatically look suspicious?
Well, it doesn't automatically mean he's lying, not necessarily. But for a defense attorney, it's gold. They can suggest, quite effectively, that maybe the memory isn't quite as pure as it seems. Maybe hearing other things, maybe just thinking about it over time. It could subtly reshape that recollection. It casts doubt on the, let's say, the pristine nature of the memory from that moment.
Right, the integrity of that initial recall makes sense. And they didn't just stop with the timeline, did they? The defense then shifts focus slightly?
No, they moved on to the actual word Karen Reed allegedly used about finding John in the snow, the specifics.
Oh, like the exact phrasing.
Yeah. Initially, Whitley had mentioned something about Karen asking about her husband. I think the word was sitting in the snow.
Sitting. Okay, that implies a certain posture, maybe even a state of consciousness.
Perhaps. But then, under cross-examination, his certainty about that specific word, sitting, seemed to waver.
Oh, so he wasn't sure anymore.
He couldn't definitively say if she used the word sitting or maybe lying, or even just a more general term like, being out there. He became uncertain.
And again, the defense focuses on these seemingly small word changes. Why are those tiny details potentially so important?
Because trials are built on narratives, on specific versions of events. If a key witness isn't sure about the exact description, was he sitting, was he lying? It introduces ambiguity. It allows the defense to say, look, even this key witness isn't certain about the details the prosecution is presenting. It weakens the certainty.
I see. It chips away at the clarity the prosecution wants. And this is where the accounts mention a change in Whitley himself, right? His demeanor.
Yes, absolutely. The descriptions suggest a real shift. He went from appearing, composed, confident.
Like the experienced first responder.
Exactly. To someone who seemed hesitant, uncertain. The sources mentioned visible discomfort. His confidence seemed to, drain away a bit under that questioning.
That visual change in demeanor must be powerful for a jury to witness.
Oh, definitely. It's not just the words, it's how they're delivered. Uncertainty can look like unreliability, fairly or unfairly.
And the defense didn't just leave that hanging, did they? They actually suggested reasons why his testimony might be changing or uncertain.
They did. They floated the idea that maybe his emotions were playing a role, or perhaps even an unconscious desire to help the prosecution's case.
Suggestive emotional influence. How does that work in court? Does it imply he's biased?
It's a careful line to walk. It doesn't always mean accusing someone of deliberate bias, but rather suggesting that powerful emotions, Sympathy, a desire for justice, connection to the community can subtly, unintentionally, color memory. It's about suggesting the testimony might not be purely objective.
And they tied that into his personal connections.
Yes, they brought up his ties to the victim's family. In a small community, these relationships are complex. The defense implied that these connections, however unintentional, might have influenced how he remembered and recounted the events of that night.
It adds another layer of potential influence on memory. It's not necessarily malice, just human complexity.
Precisely. And then came a really pivotal moment, it seems. Whitley was asked directly, was he quoting Karen Reed word for word?
Okay, the moment of truth on that point, what did he say?
He admitted he wasn't. He said he was relying more on his general impression, his feelings, the overall sense of what was said during a very intense situation, rather than a precise, verbatim recollection.
Wow. So admitting it's an impression, not a direct quote. What's the immediate impact of that kind of admission, legally speaking?
Legally, it significantly weakens the weight of that specific testimony about her words. It is not a quote, but an impression. It becomes much more subjective, much more open to interpretation, and crucially, doubt. It's not presented as hard fact anymore.
Yeah, that feels like a major concession. And the courtroom reaction, the sources mention that.
They do. They describe a noticeable change in the atmosphere. Jurors apparently looked more alert, maybe exchanging glances, looking questioning. It suggests that admission really landed. It created that tangible sense of doubt about Whitley's account of her statements.
So pulling this together, what's the upshot for the Karen Reed trial at this stage? Whitley's credibility, at least on these specific points, seems shaken. Is this a big win for the defense?
It certainly appears to be a significant moment for the defense, based on these accounts. It definitely puts a dent in a potentially key piece of the prosecution's narrative. When a first responder's detailed memory is questioned successfully, it can shift the momentum.
But it's not game over, right?
Oh, absolutely not. This is one witness, one part of the trial. As the sources remind us, there's much more to come. More witnesses, more evidence. This creates doubt, it shifts things, but the final outcome is still very much undecided.
Okay. So the main takeaway from this part of the trial, this deep dive, is really how the defense managed to effectively create doubt. They did it by meticulously highlighting those inconsistencies that emerged over time in Whitley's statements.
And by suggesting his memory might have been shaped by factors other than pure recall emotions, impressions, maybe even those community ties.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about eyewitness testimony in general, how reliable it actually is.
It certainly does. And that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. How much do you think memory can be influenced? By time passing? By strong emotions? By the people we know and the communities we're part of?
Yeah, think about how those factors might play out, not just in a courtroom drama like this, but maybe even in how we all remember things from our own pasts.
Are our memories as solid as we like to think? Or are they constantly, subtly being reshaped without us even realizing it? Something to consider.